Mr. Secretary, we're in the middle of the United Nations General Assembly right now, but give us a sense of, there's been a lot of talk. What actually has gotten accomplished so far? What specifically has gotten done?
I think more countries are becoming aware they've got to step up their game before we go to Glasgow for the Conference of the Parties meeting. We also have had the United States, President Biden, put on the table a doubling of the amount of money that the United States will do in terms of the 100 billion total that has to be put together. China announced yesterday they will no longer fund coal externally in other countries. So people are taking steps. People are beginning to build some momentum, I think. The question is, will it be enough?
So as you say, President Biden doubled the commitment from the United States toward the $100 billion. Is that enough? Because I've seen some estimates that say that actually it should be more like $40 billion should be the U.S. share toward that $100 billion.
Well, they doubled the doubling, and I think everybody understands that we have a complicated Congress right now. I think it's what the market will bear, but it's also a significant increase of the United States effort. I mean, President Biden is putting more, about 11 billion plus on the table, and that's an important contribution. Other countries need to also do their part.
You said what the market will bear, maybe what Congress will bear. Is it your best estimate, having served there for so long, that actually you can get the 11.4 billion through this Congress?
Yeah, for sure. I really believe that. I think that there's a majority in Congress now that understands, after this summer, Mother Nature's messages to the United States and the world have been pretty clear, and that is that the climate crisis is growing. It already costs us hundreds of billions of dollars. That's what we spend for the intensity of the storms we're witnessing, the flooding, the amount of fire loss, damages, the warming of the ocean. These things are all growing in their ability to be able to disrupt the marketplace. And if you want to look at real cost, that disruption is hundreds of times beyond the amount that's being asked to help solve the problem.
So to get into the weeds just a little bit here, because you served up there, when you say that there's a majority in Congress, do you include Republican senators, some of your former colleagues? Because right now there's a lot of trouble getting things passed through Republican senators.
With respect to climate, I believe there are Republicans who are ready to come to the table now, for sure. And in the Senate, for instance, I know that Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, Rob Portman, I mean, there are a group of senators and people beyond that who I think know that we have to respond. Their communities, the states they represent, are getting hit by the impacts of climate. I mean, we spent $265 billion just to clean up after 3 storms a couple of years ago. And now I think this year there's been more than 100 billion spent on the last storm. So we're seeing major demand on the public treasuries of states and the federal government without doing anything. And every analysis tells us it is absolutely far more expensive to do nothing, to not respond, than it is to respond.
President Biden clearly has made climate a priority, including making you his special envoy on climate questions. We have the budget proposal kicking around the Congress right now, up to $3.5 trillion. A significant portion of that is devoted to climate. Can that get through reconciliation?
Well, I hope it can. I mean, that's beyond my pay grade right now. I'm the climate guy, not the budget guy, or I know that the White House is working hard, the President's working hard on that. And I hope it will happen because it's actually not an expenditure. It's an investment that will repay itself many times over in the United States. Many countries are now chasing new technologies. We need to be doing that. We need to be the country that we've traditionally been, where we're the people who go to the moon, invent the internet, can drive a rover around Mars. I mean, we do amazing things when we put ourselves to the task. We need to do that now so that we're helping to invent, if not inventing ourselves, the new fuels, the new storage capacity, the battery storage, the green hydrogen, the direct air carbon capture, the carbon capture utilization and storage techniques. There are so many things that need to be done in this, David, that we've got to unleash this incredible entrepreneurial, innovative skill we have in America. And I think there are a majority of people in the United States Congress who can see the benefit of doing so.
Beyond President Biden's commitment of $11.4 billion, you also referred to President Xi having sent a statement to the General Assembly about coal-fired plants and stopping the export of them from China. How far does that go toward what you asked for? You asked him for that, as I recall.
Yes, we've been talking about that since way back in January when I first had my first meeting. This is one of the first issues we raised, is the need to end the foreign finance of coal, the foreign investment of coal. Why? Because as of yet, there's no means of really having clean coal, and it is the creator of the greatest amount of emissions in the world, unabated, it is, as it is in many other countries. So the last thing we needed was any country that's going out and pushing new coal-fired power plants. We have some in America still. We have some nuclear plants in America still. We have 20% of our power in Massachusetts comes from nuclear. Nobody's saying close that now, or nobody, I think, absolutely rational with respect to what the choices are. But we cannot continue to pour emissions into the atmosphere, which only heightens the level of the damage being done. The best scientists have told us we have now about 9 years within which to make the critical decisions and implement them to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. That's what we have to do now. We need to have about a 45% reduction in our emissions. We currently in the United States have set a target of 50 to 52% over the next 10 years. Canada, Japan, the UK, the EU have all joined together to reach for above what the science says we have to do. So we keep alive the proposition that we can limit the Earth's temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Right now, 55% of global GDP, with the countries I just listed, are on track to actually keep it to the 1.5. We need the other 45% to join us now. And there's no way to get to net zero by 2050. There's no way to do what we need to do 2020 to 2030 unless we have all countries at the table reducing.
So that raises the specific question of what more do you need from China? I understand you're going to be going back to China for more discussions about climate. What's next on the agenda? What are you asking for?
Well, first of all, we're grateful to President Xi for taking the step that he took. And I know President Xi is personally invested in this issue. They're doing a lot of work in China, crunching the numbers. China is the #1 manufacturer of renewable energy in the world. It's also the #1 deployed in renewable energy. But because it is so big, with so many people and such a sizable economy now dependent on coal, it must begin the transition sooner. So we hope China can peak earlier. We hope China can begin to reduce at some point sooner because it is producing now about 28% of all the world's emissions. We're at 11%, we're #2. Then you have India around 7 or so, and Russia, and successively down to countries that produce 2%. All of them, the 20 nations, there are 20 nations that produce 80% of all the emissions. Those 20 countries must lead the effort to make Glasgow meaningful, because too many of the countries, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, produce infinitesimal, less than 1%. They're not the principal problem. And unless the 20 take the lead, we're going to have difficulty deploying the technologies for the other countries so they can avoid making the mistakes that we have made.
Back to China for a moment. They still get a lot of energy within China from coal-based plants. Is there any prospect of the United States and China agreeing together on some mutual pact about reducing, eventually eliminating the use of coal?
I think it would be great. I think it would be great if we could do that, David, and we've certainly talked about it over the last 8 months. China, I hope, over the course of the next round of discussions, will feel that they've done enough crunching of numbers and that they've figured it out, and hopefully President Xi will feel this is a way for the U.S. and China to get on a cooperative track that begins to open possibilities to do the other things we also need to focus on.
Another issue related to China is importing of solar panels, because clearly a priority of the Biden administration is really addressing climate, but it's not the only priority. There are other things as well, such as the Uyghur situation in the West. What is the process by which one trades off climate against human rights?
Well, life is always full of tough choices in the relationship between nations. Ronald Reagan thought the Soviet Union was the evil empire, and he continually directed a lot of energy at getting the Soviet Union to change. He then went to Reykjavik, met with Gorbachev, and decided together, two human beings, two men got together and said, you know what? This doesn't make sense that we're aiming 50,000 warheads at each other, that we're always on the brink of potential of a conflict. And so they turned that around. And we went from 50,000 warheads facing each other to 1,500 plus. And perhaps it can go further. But the point I'm making is that even as there were egregious human rights issues, which Ronald Reagan called them out on, we had to find a way forward to make the world safer, to protect our countries, and act in our interests. We can do and must do the same thing now. Yes, we have issues, a number of different issues. But first and foremost, this planet must be protected. We all need to do that for our people. The population of China, 1.4 billion people, they care about clean air, clean water. They want a planet that is respected and that they can look to for future generations. And they need that as much as we do. So the hope is that if our cooperation can come forward on this issue, that could perhaps open the door to saying, you know what, we did it there. Let's see if we can find a way to deal with cyber, or deal with nuclear, or deal with some of these other issues. And I believe there are clearly other areas where cooperation could produce something.
It's not just in the area of human rights where there can be tensions and priorities. Talk about Buy America, an important policy of this administration. Can we get to the ambitious goals that President Biden has set for the country in terms of really going to zero emissions by only buying America?
Well, look, that's, again, that's a different territory. We've got trade people who are working on that. We've got a whole bunch of people engaged in, and ultimately, hopefully, will be engaged in trade negotiations with China and so forth. Every president, every country tries to produce jobs for its own country. There's nothing new in that. Obviously, you have to do so within the framework of the international trade structure. And that's always a little bit of a challenge, and people challenge it accordingly. But I'm confident the United States and China can reach agreement on some tricky economic issues. We've done it previously. I'm sure we can do it now, and we've got a good team poised to have those discussions.
Do we need to invest in our capacity, for example, to build solar panels right here in the United States? And if so, how are we going to make that
I'd love
investment?
it. We did before, and we wound up with some problems with dumping. And so our market diminished, obviously. I think we could easily, given the demand that we need now, we need to be building the equivalent of the world's largest solar field every day for the next 10 years, de minimis. That's a huge undertaking. And every country needs to be involved in deploying solar and wind. So the supply chains need to grow. And I know India is focused on this issue of growing their supply chain. We should be also, and others need to be as well.
You know, as you know well, Michael Bloomberg is the founder and majority shareholder of our company, our parent company, and he is very involved through his philanthropic efforts in really eliminating coal-producing electricity in the country. What is the realistic timeline for the United States in getting that done?
Well, let me just say, first of all, Michael Bloomberg has done really superb work and deserves enormous credit for what he's done. I'm not saying that just because I'm here, but he has led the charge on helping to transition away from unabated coal and set an example for the world with respect to this. So we've already transitioned. I think we've closed some 500 coal plants in the United States, and there are more slated to do that. Now, you know, for those states that are producing coal, the marketplace is doing this. This is not a public policy that has made the decision. Congress hasn't said this has to happen. It's happening because the marketplace is moving away from coal, first of all, because coal's far more expensive than solar and wind. And if you took the true costs of coal, David, which nobody does, but if you really aggregated the cost of black lung disease, the cost of air quality, of pollution. We lose 10 million people a year on the planet because of air pollution. And much of that comes from coal burning and the particulates that travel in the air. If you look at the coal sludge and ash that gets in lakes and streams and kills fishing and local community, you look at what's happened with the overall warming of the ocean today. What's the cost of that for what's happened to the coral reefs and the increased acidity of the ocean that comes from the coal that falls, coal dust that falls as rain? I mean, these are realities. You accrue that, coal's infinitely more expensive than other forms of power today. And so we need to be producing according to what the market is going to decide. And right now the market is betting on solar and wind and hydro and alternatives and new technologies like green hydrogen and battery storage and the potential of direct air carbon capture or breakthroughs on carbon capture utilization and storage. There's so many areas that the demand is going to be there. And what we need are the technologies and products that fill that demand.
One possible way of internalizing some of those externalities that you're talking about is through something you and I have talked about before, which is a carbon border adjustment tax or mechanism. Are we diverging from Europe in how we're handling this? Because it appears that Europe's handing that direction. Are we going to have a trade dispute with Europe over this?
Well, I hope not. And my expectation is that we're going to be hopefully unified as we come out of Glasgow and so forth. But a lot of that depends on what other countries that are big coal users decide. If they decide they're going to compete with the rest of the world, and they're going to compete by producing goods at lower cost than everybody else because everybody else is adding on the cost of dealing with climate and they're not, that's an invitation to a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And we're in agreement with our friends in Europe that it has to be explored. It's one of the tools that may, at last resort, be something people have to do. Far more effective would be for the world to come together, to raise the ambition broadly, all of us together, for what we're going to do in the next 10 years, and to contemplate the possibilities of pricing carbon on a global basis. If that were to happen, you'd have a lot more rapid reduction of emissions and probably a lot more certainty in the marketplace about where things are going.
Finally,
by the way, I've said that. I was for that position before I became envoy. That is not yet the official position of the administration, which is examining all of these exigencies and has yet to go through the formal policy-making process. But I think it's one of the things that a lot of people are thinking about, including in the United States Senate, and that includes Republicans and Democrats alike.
Fair point. So finally, through your career, you've had to deal with a lot of complicated negotiations, first in the Senate and then as Secretary of State. I've heard it said that this is one of the most difficult multilateral negotiations ever with 196 participants, right, around the globe. Give us a sense of how hard it is, and is it made more difficult when there are other foreign policy things that come up, such as Afghanistan, which really complicates relations around the world?
Well, everything complicates everything in today's world, David. There's nothing easy, I think, in public policy. The climate negotiations are a case study in both diplomacy and negotiation because you have so many parties and so many different interests. And you have to deal with all of them. I just met yesterday virtually with the island states, the Pacific Island states, the Marshall Islands, other states, Kiribati, so forth. They have a problem, which is they're disappearing.
It's existential for them.
It's existential. And they need to be able to adapt. They need to be able to build resilience. And we don't know what will happen in the long run to them because it depends on what we do in Glasgow. If we hold on to 1.5 degrees or get close to it as a limit of the Earth's warming, which is still within reach, that's what's important, then we can help folks around the world to survive and do better. But if we don't, we're going to have massive numbers of refugees. We're going to have food disruption, water disruption, the potential of conflict between nations. Our military, the United States Pentagon, has declared that the climate crisis is a threat multiplier. And they actually make contingent plans with respect to national and international security based on what is happening with respect to the climate crisis. This is not something that we can afford to avoid dealing with. It's not something that deserves to be the victim of disinformation and denial any longer. It's happening. Everybody sees that it's happening. We can still, according to the scientists, prevent the worst consequences. And that is what is urgent about Glasgow.